just say as I get started here that some of you have asked about the stuff for Gigi's house, and because you're putting things like gift cards in that box, that might be a concern to you. So I'm making Jeff stand up because Faye won't stand up, but Faye is sitting next to him. This is Jeff and Faye Price. And so they are the ones that are helping to coordinate that. So they will get the stuff out of that box every week. So it won't be just be sitting here, but if you feel like you need to put it in somebody's hand, then you can get it back into their hands, and that'd be a good place for you to go. Thank you, Jeff. So we are in James. We're moving on to the 5th chapter of James today. When we start this last chapter, there's so many good lessons for our lives that are in here. But as we get to this first chapter, this 5th chapter, what we're going to talk about today is, what I want us to talk about is, who is this rich person that he's mentioning in here? And I'd also like to say, when I read through this passage, it's a passage like this that it's really easy for us to decide this is probably not for us. It's not talking about me. And so I want you, as we go through this, these are probably some of the strongest words that James has used in this whole book. There are some really good things, but these are some really, really strong words in this passage. And so it's really easy for you to look at this and say, oh, he's not talking about me. And he doesn't get very far. In just the first few words, he will use a word, rich. And so one of the things that you will think immediately is, well, he's not talking about me because I'm rich. So he's talking to somebody else. So this would be one of those passages that if you were going through it, if you were doing your daily devotions in this, you might get to this. In my Bible, I've got headings that have been put in over different sections. So I might just skip when it talks about rich. Have you ever filled out any of those papers that you get to number 2 and it says yes or no, and if you do no, then it says go to the bottom of the page because you're done? That's what I would do with this. It's talking about rich, and so I would just skip down to the next place, down to verse 7. There are some really good things in these first 6 verses that you and I ought to know about and we ought to pay attention to. So he's speaking here to rich people, but I beg you, don't just assume that this is not a message for you, that this is not talking about you and me. He's speaking to the rich people here, and he's got some really choice words for them in these first 6 verses here. And he's talking about some people. When you listen to this, you'll say, oh, he's talking about some people that are taking advantage of other people. I'm not taking advantage of other people. So again, this is not talking to me. The warnings here, I think there are some warnings here that absolutely do apply to us. And sometimes we can go through and say, oh, it's not me because it's such strong language. You really don't want to think that anybody, God, you really don't want to think anybody is talking this strongly to you. So it's hard to imagine that this really would apply to us. So I just challenge you as we go through this morning, take a look at the words and see just what it says, and just say to yourself, does this apply to me? Just the strength of the words alone ought to at least make you say, let me make sure this doesn't apply to me. Sometimes when I'm talking to somebody about salvation, and they may say, I just think everybody's going to make it to heaven. That's not how that's going to work, by the way. Or they may say, I think I'm good enough to make it to heaven. You're not good enough to make it to heaven. They may think there are multiple ways to get to heaven. Sometimes what I say to them is this: you better be sure what you're thinking is right, because the consequences, if you're wrong, are really bad. If you think there is no heaven, or maybe if you think there's no hell, because there are some people who think there's a heaven and that all of us are going there and there really isn't a hell, you better be sure that's right, because the consequences of you being wrong is really bad and for a really long time. In fact, long time doesn't go in there. It's eternity. So if I'm wrong, then okay. But if you're wrong, you better be sure the consequences are. So on this passage, I would just say the terms that he's using here are so strong. Just be sure that he's not talking about you, because we live in a time when really a lot of us are really well off. We really are well off. How many of you have ever been outside of the United States? Okay. How many of you, no, I'm not going to ask you that. I was going to ask how many of that it was on a cruise, because that really doesn't count. I had pictures that came up on my on Facebook this last week that I just saw, and it just reminded me that a year ago I came back this last weekend from Haiti, and I got pictures starting the week before when we were on the plane going. And so as I was working on this message, it just reminded me. How many of you have ever been to a third world country? Yeah, it is. Listen, it will change your life. Now, I will also tell you this. After you get home for long enough, then you get over it. I mean, you just do. You get there and you cannot believe what people are doing. When we would go down to Honduras, when Ben lived there, it was just amazing some of the things that we would see. I mean, it's quite an eye opener. Anybody watch House Hunters? I watch House Hunters. Last night I was watching Caribbean Life. When I look at some of those houses, my house is really not that big a deal. It's nothing like what I'm looking at on TV. There's lots of things. I was watching a car auction this last week. One of my cars has 160,000 miles on it. The other one rolled over to 190,000 this week. Both working fine. But I mean, that's the cars that we're driving. So it's pretty easy to say, I'm just living kind of meager. I mean, I'm just kind of getting by. When Ben lived in Honduras, one of the times when we went there, we came back, and at the orphanage they had just gotten Wi-Fi. I don't know how, because the people next to them didn't have water, but they had gotten Wi-Fi. I don't know how all that worked out, but anyway, they had Wi-Fi. So when we got home, Ben, we were Skyping with him, and I was on a laptop, and he wanted the girls there. I mean, they were seeing stuff they were never going to see. They didn't see much more than what was on their mountain. A big trip was to go 4 miles away, 3 miles away to town, and it was nothing that you and I we would call it town, but that's where they would go. So I was showing them around the house. So I showed them out in the backyard, and it dawned on me, we have this backyard. It isn't anything luxurious unless you just came back from Honduras. It was just our backyard. Nobody else used it. It was just us. And then I got to show them around the house, and we had room after room after room, because we had, just Andrew and I were living there at the time. We had 3 bedrooms. Only 2 people living there. We have 2 bathrooms. I just came back from being in Honduras with them, where multiple people are sharing a bathroom. They have their clothes hung up in a cubby hole this wide, and that's okay. They don't have enough clothes to fill it up. Some of them were fortunate enough to have a dress that they wore to church on Sunday. The same dress. I got up this morning and tried to decide how many weeks has it been since I wore this shirt, so that you would not think that this was the only shirt I had to wear on Sunday. They wear the same dress every week to church, because that's the dress that they have to wear to church. Then we went outside, and I was showing them in the front yard, and we had walked every place we had been while we were in Honduras. We had walked every place we'd been. And in the driveway, so I had a car, Andrew had a car, Ben was in Honduras, but he had a car at my house. We had 2 people living in the house. We had 3 cars there. If you ever go to one of these third world countries, you will come back and realize we are really, really well off. So here in James 5, I'll tell you what he says at the beginning. I'm not going to read all this right now. I'll read all of it in just a minute. But in James 5, here's what he says. Now listen, you rich people. This is probably not talking about us, so I'm not worried about the next part either. Weep and wail because of the misery that is coming you. How much money do you have? I mean, you feel like you have enough, or do you feel like you really would be happier if you just could have a little bit more? What kind of car are you driving? Could you be happier if you just had a little bit newer, a little bit better car? Or the house that you're in, would you feel better if you just had, you think you'd be happier if you had just a little bit better, bigger car, maybe that you would be happier? That really isn't true. You won't be. You feel like if you could live just a little bit nicer home, that it would be better. Larry Burkett is no longer alive, but he was one of the first Christian financial counselors that gave us lots of good guidelines on financial things. Larry Burkett he did a lot of financial consulting, but he said in the Bible there are about 500 plus, a little over 500 verses that talk about prayer in the Bible. You know how many verses there are that talk about how we treat our possessions, money, and other things? 2,350 verses. So many more than there even are in the Bible on prayer. Sometimes people like to brag about the money that they have. I heard about a guy that lived on the East Coast, a man and his two sons. One of the sons moved and went to the West Coast, and he made it really big on the West Coast. I mean, he was making all kinds of money. And so he didn't disown his family, but he never went back to them. He didn't have time to go back to them. Well, the man died. So the brother that was still there on the East Coast sent a message to his brother on the West Coast and said, Dad has died, we're trying to do the funeral. And he said, listen, my business is going so good, I am so busy, I can't get back to the funeral. So I'll tell you what I'll do. You do whatever you want to for the funeral. Do a really good funeral. You do the funeral, I'll pay for everything. So they had a really good funeral, really nice funeral, and the guy on the West Coast paid for everything. After the funeral was over, the month after the funeral was over, he got a bill for $240. Yeah, they paid it because it was just another bill. Then the next month he got a bill for $240. The next month he got a bill for $240. So finally he called his brother on the East Coast and said, listen, I paid for everything for the funeral. I said I would do that, but every month I'm getting this bill for $240. You know what it is? The brother on the East Coast kind of laughed. He said, yeah. He said, you said do the funeral up in style. He said, so I buried him in a rented tux. And that's the bill each month for the rented tux. Some people just want everybody to know that they've got a lot of money. Let me give you a definition of rich. I'm a rich person. Some of you are rich people. Here's what it means to be rich. To be rich, you have all of your basic needs met, and you have the capacity to enjoy life. You have all of your basic needs met, and you have the capacity to enjoy life. I know some people that have more money than I do, and they're rich. I know some people that don't have as much money as I do, and they are rich as well. By the same token, I know of some people that have millions of dollars, but they are not rich. You know why? They're miserable. Even with all of the money they have, that they don't have the capacity to enjoy life. You know the old saying, money can't buy happiness? Somebody added to that and said, no, but if you've got money, you can sure buy a better level of misery. It is just a different level of misery. The Bible has a lot to say. So let's read these first verses here in chapter 5. James chapter 5. These first 6 verses say, now listen, you rich people, weep and wail because of the misery that is coming on you. Your wealth has rotted, and moths have eaten your clothes. Your gold and silver are corroded. Their corrosion will testify against you and eat your flesh like fire. You have hoarded wealth in the last days. Look, the wages you have failed to pay the workers who mowed your fields are crying out against you. The cries of the harvesters have reached the ears of the Lord Almighty. You have lived on earth in luxury and self-indulgence. You have fattened yourselves in the day of slaughter. You have condemned and murdered the innocent one who was not opposing you. These are some really strong words against whoever it is he's writing to here. Some wealthy people and some rich people that he's writing to. Let me just say at the outset, I don't think the Bible teaches that there's anything wrong with being wealthy. Throughout the Bible, we find people that are wealthy, but here's the key. Some people allow their possessions to possess them. Others possess their possessions. Some people allow their possessions to possess them. Other people, they become so greedy, so hungry for more and more and more. And that's the kind of person that James is talking about here. But there are others who God has blessed with money, and he has given them money, and it's just something that they put back into circulation, and it doesn't have a hold on them. I read this this last week, and this probably does typify many Americans. Somebody has said the average American drives a bank-financed car, over a bond-financed highway on credit card gas to open a revolving charge account so he can fill his savings and loan financed home with installment purchased furniture, and we call it the land of the free. You're in bondage to all of those people. Most people, if you're honest, most people harbor a secret fantasy that one day they will just get filthy rich. I mean, so rich that they could even fulfill the lifestyles of the rich and famous. That's the best I can do on that. You remember a show several years ago? There was a show called The Millionaire. Now, not Who Wants to Be a Millionaire, The Millionaire. The old show, The Millionaire, you can't find it on Nickelodeon, so if that's where you're looking for shows, you're not going to get this one. The Millionaire, it was a show about a guy who had a bunch of money, millions of dollars, and he would send his agent to go to these unassuming, ordinary, common people, and he would send his assistant with a check for $1 million. And the guy would show up and he would give them this money. And I mean, people just thought, how wonderful if this could just happen to me. Well, today we don't have the show The Millionaire, but there are a lot of things that feed on our greed. I don't know what you guys think about the lottery, and don't tell me what you think about it, but I will just tell you, it is just a poor man's tax. There are so many people that buy lottery tickets that absolutely cannot afford them. And it's because they are hooked on the possibility that if they just could make it rich, then all of their problems would go away. I can tell you, not from experience, but from seeing other people, their problems will have just begun. They don't know how many relatives they've got until they come into a bunch of money. There was a church in another state that I read about, and it was a state that did not have a lottery. And this church had a family that they were helping. They were helping them with all kinds of needs that they had. They were taking them food, they were taking them clothing, supplies for the kids for school, and where they lived, it was a 5-hour drive to a neighboring state that had a lottery. And the church, after many months of helping this family, found out that the family was taking a 5-hour trip every week, 5 hours each way, 10 hours on the road to go get lottery tickets. Because it becomes, listen, it can become an addiction for some. I have been to, years ago I was able to be in Las Vegas. I was traveling with some friends and we're in Las Vegas. And listen, I can tell you, I can put a nickel, a dime, a quarter, whatever, in a slot machine and wait until the thing stops to see if I want anything and walk away. I can just do that. Some people can't do that. They have to put in more and more and more, and then they finally win, and they put all of it back in as well. Sometimes the very people that cannot afford to play some of those games of chance are the very ones that buy them, because everybody has a secret fantasy that one day I'm going to strike it rich, and then I'll be able to do anything that I want, and I'll be happy. And the Bible just says that is absolutely not so. There are a lot of people that have a lot of money, and they are miserable, miserable, miserable. And this passage is talking about people and how they abused their wealth. So it's really a pretty simple passage. So let me just give you 3 things out of this passage this morning, and it won't take long to go through all of these. I hope a lot of this does not apply to you, but I will tell you, when it talks about the rich people, even if you're not doing all of the other things, it is talking about you and me, because we are really rich. So number one of the things that we can learn from this passage, the wrong way to get wealth. The wrong way to get wealth, to acquire or obtain wealth. There is a right way to make money. There's a right way, but we're going to talk about at least a couple of wrong ways, because that's what these people were doing here. The first was holding back payments. The Bible says here that this is what they were doing. In verse 4 it says, the wages you failed to pay the workmen who mowed your fields are crying out against you. James is writing about people who got rich because they had people working for them and they didn't pay them. Now you may think that you may fit into this category. If you are somebody who has employees, then you may fit into this category. If you look over in Ephesians chapter 6, there are other places, but there's some good places to tell what the relationship ought to be for an employer and an employee, and how both of us are supposed to act, what God expects from both of us. But let's face it, most of us don't have employees that we're paying. But you know what this passage, I think, is saying to us? I do think there's a biblical principle that teaches that we should pay our bills. You should not withhold payment on things that you owe. People who are believers oftentimes fail to pay their bills. Years ago, so if you don't, I shouldn't tell you all of these stories, but years ago I worked, before I was in ministry, my training for getting into ministry was that I was repossessing cars. And I was chasing accounts that were 90, 120 days past due. So it wasn't the people that had missed a car payment. It was people that were, not only had missed them, their plan was to hide as long as they could until you found it. It was kind of a game of cat and mouse, and I may have enjoyed it more than I was supposed to. But that was what I was doing. But you know what would happen in the office? Because other people in the office were calling past due accounts. You know who some of the most notorious people were for not paying their bills? Preachers. Lots of them. And they had a time in the office talking about, and there was something that came up every single month. Preachers, they would just lump them in with all Christians, so everybody got the bad rap on that. But the preachers who wouldn't pay their bill because they thought they were above other people. This was before I was in ministry. You know how hard it was to talk about anything remotely spiritual with them in the office as they laughed about the preachers who wouldn't pay their bills? We're supposed to be paying our bills. So the Bible says in Romans chapter 13, it says, be in debt to no man. Now, I don't think the principle there is teaching that you should never borrow any money, but in America, in recent years, we've absolutely lost our mind on what we do in going into debt. I think a good financial goal for everyone would be to get out of debt and stay out of debt. Oftentimes we borrow money against something to finance something like a house that may appreciate in value, but then we compound the debt problem by borrowing for depreciating items, and then we get more and more, and some of the things we absolutely don't need, and then we can't repay, and overnight we're just in a mess. So if you owe money, do everything you can to pay your debts. Do whatever you can. And listen, that may mean that you've got to adjust your living. If you've not been one of the people to be fortunate enough for whatever reason to go, whether with military or with a mission trip to go to a third world country, even a lot of the people that I saw that did not have anything, they had a smile on their face. I was talking to somebody yesterday, and I was telling them about going, when we would go to Honduras, some of the girls would play jacks. Remember playing jacks? You know what they had to play jacks with? They had a ball that was about this big around that looked like a dog had eaten about half of it. So it didn't bounce right anyway. And then that's all they had, because they had gravel. And so they'd get someplace, I don't know how many pieces you need to play jacks, but they would get enough rocks, and then they would play just with this jacks, with just this ball and a rock. And then when they got ready to get up and leave, well, they just left the rocks there. They were going to be at the next place too. They just take that ball, and they weren't happy. Here, if we had a set of jacks and you lost one of them, you just have to throw the whole thing away. Go get another one, because you got to have a matching set, don't you? So anyway, so one of the things is holding back payments. Adjust your lifestyle so you can pay the debts that you owe. And it would be a good thing if you try to get out of debt and then stay out of debt. It can be done. Second thing, just briefly I'll tell you, is they got rich by dishonesty. The Bible says that in the last part of verse 6, it says you condemn and murder innocent people. You've used bribery and you used extortion. You've cheated. If you apply that to today, people that get kickbacks, get money paid under the table for them to be able to get rich. I wasn't going to give you much on this dishonesty, because I hope you would say if it's illegal unethical, immoral, that we ought not to be doing it. So I hope you could figure most of that out on your own. But last night I Googled this. I Googled get rich quick. And the first thing that I clicked on, it gave several things, but if you scroll down to the very end, I guess this is about the only thing that was really credible on this page. When I got to the very end of this get rich quick scheme, here's what it said. Getting rich requires a lot of work. If you encounter tips on how to get rich without needing to exert effort, be wary. Rather than looking for ways to get rich, find a way to make legitimate money. I don't know if they meant everything you read up to this part, just ignore but this is my disclaimer that really, to get rich quick, you're going to have to work really hard, and so probably throw the word quick out of there. So they had got money by dishonesty. I hope that doesn't apply to us. The next thing is they used wealth wrong. The wrong way to use wealth. And here's what they did. They stored up things for themselves. They stored it up for themselves. Look in verse 3. You have hoarded wealth in the last days. I'm not talking about saving here. I'm talking about hoarding, and there's a real difference in that. Hoarding is when you try to get everything you can for yourself, and then you make sure that nobody else gets it. Have you heard this expression? Get all you can all you get, sit on the can, and poison the rest. I read that this last week, and then I saw on the news, I can't even remember the name of this company because I'd never heard of it before, but some really, really exclusive clothing manufacturer. And the reason it was on the news was because they would have excess goods to sell, and people had not bought them, so you know what they did with them? Burned them. And I can't remember now what it was, but it was like 280 million pounds of clothes that they sold. You know why? So nobody else could get them. They didn't want to take a chance on selling them at a cut rate somewhere, and then somebody has their name brand stuff and they didn't pay an exorbitant price for it. Does that not fit with this? Get all you can all you get, sit on the can, poison the rest. That's what hoarding is. I want it, and once I get it, I'll destroy all the rest of it, so you can't have what I've got. God wants us, I think, to put His wealth back into circulation. These people here, they were hoarding it for themselves. They stored it up for themselves. And when you hoard your wealth and you don't put it back into circulation, you become greedy. You become greedy of yourself. You know, it's been a long time since I read any things on Howard Hughes, and that's been, I can't even remember now how long Howard Hughes has been dead, but I know that at one point he's in a hotel in Freeport, Bahama Islands, and he has the top floor that is all his, and for several years he didn't leave that floor. He hired people that he thought he could trust to protect him. All of his food was brought in. He had tons of money. So let me ask you, think he was a happy person? No. He had hoarded and saved up all this stuff for himself. Instead of being this motel that he has this whole floor, I think the whole hotel was his, but the whole top floor was only for him. Instead of being a place of enjoyment, it became a prison for him. I'm talking about the hotel place that he was in. Somebody asked the question, how much do you think Howard Hughes left when he died? You know what the answer is. He left all of it. Yeah, he didn't take any of it with him. The Bible teaches that sometimes when you hoard for yourselves, you become so miserable, and that's using your wealth in the wrong way. Another thing that they did is they spent it on luxury for themselves. They spent it on luxury for themselves. Some time ago, I read about this Arab oil sheik who came to the United States, and he went on a shopping spree. He had 19 wives. He came on a shopping spree. He bought 19 stretch limousines, Cadillacs, one for each of his 19 wives. He bought 6 Mercedes, didn't tell who those were for. He bought 2 Porsches. I think one was a front Porsche and one was a back Porsche. He bought a $400,000 boat. He bought 4 air-conditioned John Deere tractors. And then for his wives, he bought 400 pairs of ladies' shoes. And you know why he bought it? Because he could. Because he had money. What do you suppose I'd like to know the answer to this. I wonder if those wives even had a driver's license. I mean, they lived in a country where the women, there's very little that they can do. So they may have each had their own car. Yes,
Sure.
maybe that's the place they go for solitude. What did they do with those, all those vehicles? This is what James is talking about. Look in verse 5. It says, "You have lived on earth in luxury and self-indulgence." Jesus told a story in Luke chapter 12 of the fool with the, I like to call it the big fool with the little barns. You know this story. Luke chapter 12, he talks about a farmer he's really more of an entrepreneur, maybe even than a farmer, but he traded in crops and he got such a big harvest that he filled up all of his barns. And he really did this again and again, and his barns weren't big enough. And so he said, I don't know what I'm going to do. And so then he finally came up with a good plan. I will build bigger barns to hold all of the stuff. And so that's what he did. And he kept on until I think he just had a conglomerate of barns that he's storing all this stuff in. Finally, in Luke chapter 12, this is exactly what Jesus said. That the guy said, I have made it. I have arrived. And then it says, and he said, soul, take it easy. Eat, drink, and be merry. Have you ever heard that and wondered where it came from? It comes from this story. Eat, drink, and be merry. And so this fool says, eat, drink, and be merry. Jesus said, God said that very night to that man, your soul is required of you. Jesus says at the end of that chapter then, at the end of that story, how much good are all these things to you now? Who will get what you have prepared for yourself? Not him. A lot of times we spend all of our lives accumulating, and we've got to have a certain car so that people will know how wealthy we are, or a certain brand, or a certain logo, or a certain kind of shoes, or a certain kind of clothing. And all of this is so that when people look at us, they will know that we have made it in life. The Bible says that is so empty. And you know what God called that man in Luke chapter 12? And listen, Jesus said it's a dangerous thing to call a man a fool. He said, you'll be in danger of hellfire. But God said of that man, you fool. That's what he called him. Elsewhere, Jesus said, what does it profit a man if he gained the whole world, but he loses his soul? And so, here in the Bible says, it's talking about people that got wealth the wrong way. People that used their wealth in the wrong way. And then finally, the misery that dishonest wealth produces. And it is misery. Look again at verse 1. It says, now listen, you rich people, weep and wail because the misery that is coming upon you. The Bible teaches these riches are going to vanish. And so just quickly, let me tell you, the riches are going to vanish. Your wealth has rotted and moths have eaten your clothes. I didn't think about this until just this morning, but think about this. Have you ever had clothes that you wore all the time that got eaten by moths? No, because when you're using them all the time, the moths don't get to them. I don't remember, I don't even know if people still do this, but I can remember when we used to put mothballs in, and it kept the moths away from them, and then it also made them smell where you couldn't wear them when you got them back out of the container, so they were done. But that's what about stuff, even stuff that's made out of metal, if you just don't use it, what happens to it? Rust. But what happens if you use it and use it and use it? Sometimes it gets a little squeaky, but it doesn't rust. Wood, now this may be because you take care of it, but wood, even a wooden boat would last when you use it and use it, but when you let it sit and it gets hot and cold and wet and dry and wet, it just rots. So really what he's talking about here, your wealth has rotted and moths have eaten your clothes. So this is what it was. It was all that stuff that they had. Have you ever cleaned out, oh, I don't want you to answer that because I don't want to have you ever cleaned out a place, a room, a garage, and you found something you didn't even know you had? You didn't remember having it? I see you smiling. I cleaned out something in one place one day and found a box. I ordered lots of stuff. I mean, if I can get it from Amazon, then and it's cheaper than anywhere else, and they'll deliver it to my door, then that works out. Well, if I order it, I know what it is when it shows up, so I don't always open it up. I found something one day in a box that I hadn't opened up because I had forgotten that I got it. That's what happens when we have got more stuff than we really need. So let me ask you, what do you possess today? Do you really own anything? Can you think of anything that you own today? Some of you are thinking, well, I got some property. Really? 100 years from now, will you have it? Most of us know we will not have it, and we won't know who has it. 1,000 years for sure, you won't. So you might have a home, but you really just have it temporarily. The Bible teaches the principle of stewardship. You've heard that before, but maybe you don't know what it really means. A steward is a manager. That's all he is. The Bible says God has blessed us with blessings during our lifetime, and we don't really own anything, but we manage it. Several weeks ago, one of the Bible verses I gave you was from 1 Chronicles 29:14. It says, everything we have has come from you, and we give you only what you first gave us. I pray that lots of times when I pray for our offering. Everything we have has come from you. And we give back to you only what you first gave us. Your bank account, you don't really own it. God gave it to you. He gave it to you to manage. The property that you have. If you've got stocks, you don't own them, you manage them. Jesus gave us some wonderful investment advice in Matthew chapter 6 when he said, do not store up for yourself treasures on earth where moth and rust will corrupt and thieves break in and steal. So you know what he's saying here? All of these treasures that you think are so important, dollars, portfolios, securities, property, precious gems, all of those things, he's saying they're either going to rust, or they're going to rot, or they're going to be ripped off. And you never can have a real sense of security because all of those things are so temporary. Investment papers like the Dow report, they always give you, tell you some things to stay away from. Don't invest in this or in that. And that's what Jesus is doing here. He says, don't invest your life in those things that are temporary. But then he says, I've got some good investment advice for you. Lay up for yourselves treasures in heaven where these things are not touched by moth and rust and where they'll not be stolen. Listen, you cannot take it with you, but you can send it on ahead. You really can send it on ahead. You can invest in God's kingdom, and then you never lose. That stuff that you hoard, that you're saving up for yourselves, it's temporary. It's going to be gone in just a few days. When one man heard that you couldn't take it with you, he said, well, I'm just not going to go. Well, you are going to go. And here's the deal. Where you're going, if you take that stuff with you, it's either going to burn up or you don't really need it. Is there something that you can do in kingdom work? Think about some of the things, and we will do these. We're doing some of these, but Operation Christmas Child is a way you can invest in the future. The stuff we're talking about for Gigi's house is recovering lives. That's an investment in the future. Missionaries that we support, near and far, that's an investment in the future. Anybody supporting a child with Holt International or World Vision, both of those are investments in the futures. So your riches, they really are going to vanish. Secondly, the enjoyment of life will be eroded. That's what the Bible says in verse 3. He says, these riches are going to testify against you. They're going to eat your flesh like fire. You have hoarded that wealth in the last days. You remember the story of the Midas with the golden touch? And everything that he touched turned to gold. And he got more and more greedy. And he touched more and more things. His wife turned to gold. Food turned to gold. What he would want to drink turned to gold. And so he had all this gold, but he's hungry for companionship, for food, for something to drink, because riches don't supply all of those things. When people get so concerned about making more and more and more, there's just more and more misery. And a lot of people who live around us are down and out, and they need for our church to minister to them. There are people that are up and out, and they need to know about Jesus, so they need for us to minister to them. The last thing is judgment is coming. We're going to face judgment. The Bible says in verse 5 it says, you have lived in luxury and self-indulgence. And then it says, you have fattened yourselves in the day of slaughter. That's such an interesting phrase there. Here's what he's describing. James is saying, he's describing people that are so intent upon pouring riches into their own selfishness that they're getting more and more and more for themselves and living this life of hedonism. And he says, all you're doing is fattening yourself up for the day of slaughter. Some of you all have lived on a farm. I haven't ever lived on a farm. I've mostly lived in a small city or a bigger city. But I've lived close enough to people raising animals of some type, and some of them are being raised for the slaughter. So you fatten them up until the day of slaughter. James is saying that people who are using wealth wrongly, they're fattening themselves up for the day of judgment. And here's the bottom line about what Jesus says about wealth. There are these over 2,000 verses in the Bible about talking about handling money. The bottom line is, Jesus says in Matthew 6, he says, no man can serve two masters. Either you will hate one and love the other, or you'll be devoted to one and despise the other. You cannot serve God and money. You can't serve both. It isn't that you shouldn't serve God and money. You can't serve God and money. You can't do it. The Bible doesn't say that money is the root of all evil. He says love of money is the root of all evil. So I just ask you today, what are you doing with what God has given to you? Do you remember at the end of chapter 4, you know, when the scriptures were first written, the chapters have been given to us to help us find chapters and verses, find our location in here. But isn't it interesting, what was at the end of chapter 4? It said, anyone then who knows the good to do, that he ought to do, and doesn't do it, is sin. Now listen, you rich people. You think it's any wonder that he goes from talking about people that know the right thing to do and then immediately gives the example of the rich people? What are you doing with what God has blessed you with? Are you greedy with it? Are you hoarding it? Are you giving it away? Are you putting it into circulation? Do you have the right kind of attitude towards the financial blessings that God has given you? The Bible says that if you don't, you're in great trouble. All of us in here have been richly blessed. And so let's do the right things with it. Let's pray together. Father God, I thank you for today and for this message that sometimes we'd like to think this is not talking about us. And I pray that some of the things that are really difficult in this passage about dishonestly gaining money, I pray that that really doesn't apply to us. If it does, I pray that you would have people to repent of how they have incorrectly gained wealth. But I do thank you for how richly you have blessed us. I pray that you would help us, not just in this room, not even just through our offerings. I pray that you would help us to use the blessings, the resources, the financial, the time that you've given us. I pray that you help us to use it so that we really can help others to know about you. I pray that during this time, Father, as we spend a few moments in invitation time, I pray that if there's some that need today to make a commitment to you, maybe a first-time commitment to you, to trust their life to you, so that you can give them not only the riches and the wealth that you want for us, but that you can give them direction for how to use it. I pray that you help some to make that step towards you. If others of us today need to make a commitment to be more Christ-honoring with how we are spending our resources, I pray that you would give us guidance and direction on how we would do that. So I pray that you would help us deal with us in our hearts today. In Christ's name I pray. Amen. This morning as Don comes and leads us in just a